Welcome to InFocus with Ejaz, Haider. This program comes to you from the Center for Security, Strategy and Policy Research. CESPA is an autonomous policy research center housed in the University of Lahore, and it tackles issues that impact contemporary security and strategic developments. And this program is part of that effort. Now, as I record this episode, talks in Doha have entered the second day. This is really a last-ditch effort to revive stalled negotiations, and the stakes are high as the region stands at the brink of an armed conflict between Israel and Iran. Horizontal escalation has already taken place, and no deal could make it vertical. The savagery in Gaza continues with death toll surpassing 40,000. This is, of course, bodies that have been found and counted. There is no estimate yet on those that remain buried under the debris of bombed buildings. Meanwhile, the fear of an Iranian attack poses a further serious threat to negotiations, and there's a sense that a deal might just be the off-ramp to dissuade Iran from taking action after a string of Israeli strikes took out Hamas's former political leader, Ismail Haniyeh, and senior figures in Hezbollah, most recently Fuad Shukr. The participants of the talks include CIA Director Bill Burns, there's the Mossad Chief, David Barnea. Some reports also suggested that the Shin Bet Chief is also there. There's the Qatari Prime Minister Sheikh Mohammed bin Jassim Al Thani and Egyptian intelligence head Abbas Kamel. In the meeting, Qatar, Egypt, and the United States are expected to present a plan to implement a deal that was actually proposed in May by U.S. President Joe Biden. And this was also then became part of the UNSC resolution. The Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has, of course, muddied the waters since then. Hamas is not participating in the talks, but is engaged separately with Qatari and Egyptian mediators. Bassem Naim, who's a member of Hamas's political bureau, told a U.S. TV network, and I quote from what he said, "Our position was clear. We will not go for new negotiation rounds. We'll only go to implement what has been agreed on." On Thursday, Hamas again, which was the first day of the talks, Hamas again reiterated that there will be no hostage deal or ceasefire agreement, without a complete withdrawal of Israeli troops from Gaza. The Qataris are keeping Iran in the loop, and this was actually stated by the country's foreign ministry. So to discuss the situation, I have with me Barbara Slavin. Slavin is a distinguished fellow at the Stimson Center in Washington and a lecturer in international affairs at George Washington University. She has worked on Iran for many years and has authored 2 books. With her is Dr. Sina Azodi. Azodi is professional lecturer, Elliott School of International Affairs at George Washington University. His research interests include international security, nuclear non-proliferation, and U.S. Iranian relations. Thank you so much. Since both of you have been on this program previously, as I was saying before the program to Barbara, that much water has gone down under the bridge. Last time Sina was with me, we were actually talking about Iran's attack on Israel following the Israeli attack on the Iranian consulate in Damascus. So let's talk about this being the last-ditch effort. Barbara, let me begin with you here. What do you think the prospects are? I mean, there is pressure on Netanyahu from the families of hostages. There is also pressure from the political opposition. Even some elements within the IDF and the intelligence community have been talking about having some kind of end game, and they think that it cannot be open-ended. So is that going to actually somehow convince Netanyahu that the strategy that he has been gaming up until now is finally reaching its culmination point?
First of all, thank you for having me again, and it's great to be on with my comrade in arms, Sina. There's one factor you didn't mention that I think is also weighing on Netanyahu, and that's U.S. presidential elections. Mm-hmm. And for a long time, I think Bibi has been counting on Donald Trump returning to the presidency and giving him essentially a blank check to do whatever he wants. But that situation has changed, as you may have noticed. And Kamala Harris currently is leading in many of the polls and certainly seems to have a lot of momentum behind her, while Trump is, how shall I put it deftly, he is not even the candidate he was 4 years ago. He is fumbling, frankly, and has become rather boring. I listened to him yesterday and he makes no sense. So Bibi can't count on that blank check, which means that there may be increasing pressure on him to get this over with, as even Trump has told him, essentially, finish it. The other factor is international outrage. You mentioned 40,000 at least dead. The Israeli newspaper Haaretz, which has been essential reading for all of us over the last 10 months, put out an analysis showing that Israel has, at a minimum, killed 2% of the population of Gaza, which makes this one of the bloodiest conflicts the Middle East has ever seen. And it puts Israel, frankly, it puts Netanyahu in Bashar al-Assad category. Assad killed 2% of the Syrian population, but it took him over a decade. Israel has killed at least 2% of Gaza's population in 10 months. And, you know, we can talk about U.S.-Israel relations and how we always stick up for Israel and how the West always sticks up for Israel. But I think we have passed a point where there is no longer that kind of tolerance for this. And the entire world is essentially, you know, screaming at Bibi to get this over with and get it done and stop and begin the next phase, whatever that may be. So I think something has fundamentally shifted. That doesn't mean we're going to get a ceasefire in the next few days. It may take longer than that. But I will say, as long as the talks go on, Iran is not in a position to retaliate for Haniya. So that in itself is good. If we get a longer pause between the act of killing Haniya and whatever the Iranians choose to do.
Right. You put a lot on the table. But let me, on a lighter note, ask you, you don't seem like someone who voted for Trump last time. And you're certainly not someone who's going to vote for Trump now. The point that I'm trying to make is that while you find him boring, and obviously as a rational analyst, you also believe in some kind of framework, Trump has a very large following that does not look at him in those terms in which a rational actor would define him. You might recall that the last time when that rather, what's the word I'm looking for? A distasteful locker room talk came out.
Yeah.
Lots of people, and I was watching the American analysts, and I was watching the progressive TV channels in the United States talking about Trump's campaign being a slow train wreck.
Mm.
But then we saw one of the biggest ironies of the US history. Hamilton brought in the Electoral College to make sure that a demagogue did not get the popular vote. And while Hillary got the popular vote, Trump got the Electoral College votes and became the president. So my point being that history is full of these ironies.
Yeah.
So, but leaving that aside for a while, and before I circle back to this, because I think this is an important point. In addition to Haaretz, I would also include Plus 972 and Local Call as two absolutely fantastic Israeli publications that have kept us informed of a lot of developments which you don't get to read in the Jerusalem Post or, for that matter, the Times of Israel. But let me bring in Sina, and then I will circle back to you on this point. Sina, so there is the US presidential election. The Republicans are all for it. It's not just Trump. The rather embarrassing spectacle that we saw of the U.S. Congress basically supplicating themselves unto Benjamin Netanyahu and giving him a standing ovation. So we're talking about something which it goes beyond an individual and is more structural in nature. And I think that is something which is going to impact Harris's campaign also, when she begins to balance between the progressive Democratic and Muslim Arab vote, and also the structural constraints of supporting Israel. Do you really think that Netanyahu is now losing that space, which will force him into seeking peace?
I don't think so. I hope that I'm wrong and Barbara is right. I don't think that Netanyahu will cow under pressure. His ultimate objective, and that's where Iran comes in, is to get the United States to fight Iran on his behalf. For years, he's been trying to do this. He tried to do it for the nuclear purpose. Now he's doing it for that. And he's been doing this forever. And now when it comes to Congress, we just saw an example of how the AIPAC plays a role in U.S. politics. Cory Bush was forced out of Congress by the money that AIPAC so proudly spent, and made it clear that we supported the other guy by throwing $8 million behind him, and we kicked Cory Bush out. So if you don't support us enough, we'll kick you out. And they are being, people like her, or, anyone who doesn't support Israel enough will be kicked out, and they're going to make an example of them.
Omar won, though.
Yes. I'm glad she did. But my point is, they make an example of these people. So, going back to your question, I don't think so. I don't think Netanyahu will be limited. And at the end of the day, he has very strong allies in the Congress, and they support him to the end. Just one example, and I forgot his name, is one of the members of Congress who wears IDF uniform and comes to Congress. It's just crazy.
Yeah. Since this is a family channel, I think we'll stick with crazy. But circling back to Barbara, there are, at least off the cuff, two episodes that I can recall when the US presidents said enough. And when they said enough, they actually meant enough. The first was the Suez Crisis. When the Soviet Union threatened to come in, the Brits and the French said, okay, we're leaving. But Ben-Gurion stood his ground. He wouldn't heed the call of, I think, about 6 UN resolutions and the rest of it. When President Eisenhower called him and said, look, you need to get out. He said, Mr. President, I cannot sell it to my cabinet and to Knesset. And the US president said, listen, your cabinet and Knesset is your problem, not mine. Right? And so he got the message clearly. The second episode that I can think of is when President Reagan called up Menachem Begin, and it was not a very polite phone call by all available record. And he said, look, this looks like Holocaust.
Sovereign Tatila.
right? And you need to wrap it up. And he had to wrap it up. And he then later gave interviews to U.S. newspapers saying, oh, when the president said Holocaust, I was very hurt and so on and so forth. This is all a matter of record. My point being that you're right in terms of who is there in the White House. But something seems to have changed, where despite the Biden administration officials working the phones and being, squeamish about what's going on and trying to both sides, taking these both sides kinds of what has now come to be known as this neologism about both sidism. They're trying to somehow say, okay, we are really concerned about the civilian casualties, but we also have this ironclad support for the United States, which is why Netanyahu has the space to game this.
Yeah. There is a big difference when you talk about Suez or you talk about the Lebanon invasion. These were Israeli invasions of sovereign states. And the reason, given in each case, there were attacks and so on, but nothing like what Hamas did. I think we have to bring into the equation the nature of Hamas and the shattering impact of October 7th on Israelis and on many Americans, frankly, as well. It was the worst loss of life that Israel had ever experienced in its 75 years. Now 76 years of independence. And Hamas is not the sort of actor that you can deal with in the same way that one could deal with, say, Egypt or Lebanon. So I think that's part of it. The other part is that there was initially a short ceasefire and some hostages were released last November, and this led to some optimism that this could be repeated. And there is, of course, Joe Biden himself and his long-standing commitment to Israel, the way in which he flew to Israel and so on. So to expect him to play the same role as Eisenhower or Reagan, also, having two Republicans in those days take these stands, I think is interesting and somewhat counterintuitive. Now we have, major divisions among Democrats about support for Israel, whereas the Republicans are very united in support of Israel. Anyway, it's a complicated situation. We're in an election season. It's difficult for Biden to do these things now. It might be different after our elections. If Harris wins and Biden is a true lame duck, perhaps some pressure might be exerted if we don't have a ceasefire by then, in a way that maybe we're not seeing now. But I think the U.S. is being very tough behind the scenes, and it's not just the U.S. I mean, we're seeing more and more actions by Europeans who have stood back a bit, more recognition of a Palestinian state, some threats from Great Britain to restrict arms sales to Israel. I still think something is shifting, partly because of the egregious death toll. And as I say, I have friends in Israel who had been very supportive of the war effort, who are now extremely critical or who have gone silent because they are exasperated, ashamed, terrified that Netanyahu is driving their country into the ground. People are been sitting there for 2 weeks, terrified of what the Iranians or Hezbollah are going to do in response to the assassinations. I think something is shifting.
I think, to be very honest, and I'll be very honest in the sense that, frankly, I have a dog in this fight. So I cannot be entirely objective. Let me make it very clear because it's important. And I have a dog in this fight because as a Kashmiri, whose land is occupied by India, I have this thing about occupation.
Mm.
And also as a student, a minor student of history of the Middle East, I look at Israel as a settler colonial project. It's an apartheid state. It's very clear. There's too much historical evidence of that. But we are not going into that because this program is not about that. But Hamas is a resistance group. It's not a terrorist group. Neither is Hezbollah. These are Western categories. This terminology obviously has geopolitical interests. It's to me, it's like Sinn Féin, and occupation, according to UN resolutions, has to be resisted. As a matter of fact, the occupied can call upon external parties to support them. This is again part of UN resolution. It's not something that I'm saying. So I think the most important thing for the United States is to begin to put things in the proper perspective. Let's, for instance, and I want Sina to come into this on the basis of what I'm saying, because I want to get his perspective also. Let's subtract Hamas from this.
Mm-hmm.
Prior to October 7, what was happening and what is still happening in the occupied Palestinian territories, things recorded by Israeli NGOs and rights groups, whether it's B'Tselem, whether it is the various others, the former IDF soldiers group that keeps talking about things. There's Makhsoom Watch, which talks about all of this, what happens to the Palestinians, how they have to walk on different roads, how they have different license plates. And so, I mean, it's all there. It's no secret at all. So my point really is that I consider Palestinian resistance, including armed resistance, to be absolutely legitimate against the state of Israel. And I also believe that even Rabin, who lost his life, and his speech at the Knesset is a matter of record. 29 days before he was assassinated, he told the Knesset that we are talking about a Palestinian Authority, we're not talking about a sovereign state. So there is this really a facade of a two-state solution that has been going on, who everyone has been mouthing. And I think we've now reached a point in all of this where I think in order to get a resolution, we need to begin to unpack what has been happening here so far. I want Sina to respond to whatever I've said. I mean, I've said more than what I should have said as a moderator of the program, but as I said already, that I do have a dog in this fight.
Let me say one thing, add something to what Barbara said, and I'll get to this point because I think they're connected. I think the times have changed. And what do I mean by that? I mean that the leadership in both countries have changed. Eisenhower and Reagan were Republicans, truly Republicans. They had some spine. But the new generation of Republicans, or even Biden, I think they're weak, and they don't understand, or they don't want to use the U.S. power that much. Obama understood it. He was willing to use and leverage U.S. power to pursue its own interests, the United States interests. But Biden, I'm not sure. And so this also applies, I think, to the leadership of Israel. Netanyahu absolutely is not Begin, absolutely is not Rabin. He leads Israel not for the sake of the Israeli interests, but for his own purposes. He continues the war, not because I think it's the interest of Israel to continue the war, but because he wants to stay out of jail. Because once he leaves office, he's probably going to have to go to jail. So that's one point. But I would also say now, going to the two-state solution and how much how much the relationship has changed over time. I remember, I don't remember, I've read that in 1990s, when the Bush father administration was pushing Israel to stop the settlements. So the story is the Israelis wanted to get a loan, and they had asked the United States for a guarantee so they can get a better interest rate. The Bush administration says, fine, we'll do it, but you need to stop the settlements. We won't do it. And so the Israelis go ahead with their expansion of settlements, and the U.S. doesn't do what the Israelis ask. And all of a sudden, the October surprise report comes out that some former Mossad agent had revealed, I think it was either Times or Newsweek, that when during the Reagan administration, during the hostage crisis, Bush was one of the representatives of Reagan who asked Ayatollah Khomeini and his representatives to keep the hostages so Reagan can defeat Carter in the elections. And that came very costly for George H.W. Bush. My point being is the relationship has changed. And to your question, I don't think a two-state solution is no longer feasible. It does exist on the paper, but I don't think that it's practical. A lot of people have discussed it already. And just yesterday, the widow of the Sheldon Adelson, she donated $100 million to Trump's campaign. And she asked that if he gets elected, he would just recognize the West Bank as part of the Israeli territory. So if this happens, we might just as well say goodbye to this two-state solution. And the Brits, the French, the Germans, the Russians, the Chinese are don't simply have the power to stop the United States from doing what it wants to do.
Well, I mean, you see, just before the Hamas attack in September, Netanyahu goes to the United Nations General Assembly. He's got a map of quote-unquote Israel, which he brandishes there, which has the West Bank, which has Gaza, which has Galilee, which has the Golan Heights, which has, everything. Mercifully, he hadn't put in Lebanon and Jordan into that. And before that, Begin was once asked, and this was reported by Mohammed Hakel in one of his books. Begin was once asked some reporter asked him about the boundaries of Israel, and he turns around and says, but they're all given in the Bible. So yes, I mean, so Edward Said's famous article in the London Review of Books about this capitulation, PLO's capitulation, was spot on. I think Mahmoud Mamdani's framework of the South African solution for this whole problem, I think, is also something that needs to be discussed and debated. But when you have, the ideologues, going back to the ideologues like Jabotinsky and others, you really cannot have that solution. But anyway, we can keep discussing this. But let me go back to Iran. I'll come back to Sina because, and I'm grateful to Barbara for just before the program for sending me, Sina, your article on Abbas Araghchi,
yes,
which I quickly read. Excellent article.
Thank you.
So Barbara, given the new president and given the new cabinet and given the pressure of the moment, and given the fact that because of the April attack, now Iran is in a commitment trap also, and given the fact that the supreme leader has also talked about avenging Ismail Haniyeh's assassination, there are these sort of conflicting pushes and pulls. So what are you expecting Iran to do?
Yeah, I think the longer we wait, the less likely it is that Iran is going to mount some massive military retaliation, similar to what they did in April after the killing of Iranian officers in Damascus. We're seeing a lot of commentary suggesting that Iran should not fall into an Israeli trap. that if Iran were to respond massively, Israel would not limit its response. There are threats again about attacking the Iranian nuclear program, which pop up periodically in Washington among those who've always wanted to do this and would see this as a great time to do this. The longer this goes on, of course, the U.S. has moved massive military assets into the region, so the U.S. would be very well prepared to shoot down whatever the Iranians would send. It would embroil poor Pezeshkian in a massive crisis before he's even properly started his presidency. So I'm feeling a little bit more optimistic about Iran exerting some strategic patience here and, benefiting from the fact that its diplomatic isolation has been reduced by the Haniyeh assassination. It's had the foreign minister of Jordan visit. There have been phone calls from Emmanuel Macron and from the prime minister of Britain to Pezeshkian. Everyone is begging Iran, don't do it, trying to convince the Iranians that they will benefit from not retaliating. So this gives me a little bit of hope that we're going to be able to contain the escalation. If I may say something also just about the two-state solution very briefly, the first priority, and I've been saying this for 10 months, is to end the war, to stop the killing, to help whoever is left in Gaza. That's the priority. We'll worry about whether it's one state, two state, that's down the road. Right now, our first duty is to stop killing people.
Right. Let me ask you hypothetically, and then I'll take the same question to Sina also. Why are we necessarily focusing on the Iranians launching a massive attack? What did Israel do? Whether it was Fawad Shukr, whether it was the Iranian officers in Damascus, whether it was Ismail Haniyeh, whether it's been other strikes in Lebanon, these are strikes based on actionable intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, and real-time execution of a plan.
Yeah, Iran isn't very good at that.
Right. So
they've been sending
we are supposing
the U.S. to go after the people responsible for Soleimani's death.
We're supposing that Iran does not have the same ISR capabilities. No. But assassinations can happen in many ways. I mean, assassinations can need not be very sophisticated. I'm just saying that in the event that you find a couple of Israeli officials being assassinated, won't that be a proportionate response against Israel?
As I said, I've been following Iranian attempts to retaliate for these things for a long time, and they have only succeeded in killing Israelis on a bus in Bulgaria and Argentinian Jews. They have not been able to carry out the same kind of targeted that the Israelis have managed to do. We can debate whether that's been a good strategy on the part of Israel.
No, of course. I mean,
Iran does not seem to have that capability.
No, absolutely. I have actually written about the fact that, no matter how despicable one finds the Israeli methods, the fact is that when it comes to covert operations, they are in a league of their own. And I think Mayor Dagan, who, the late Mayor Dagan, was someone who, the Mossad was already into it in a big way, but he put a lot of focus on this. So, Sina, so the scalpel is out. So we are necessarily looking at the sledgehammer, right?
Well, let me just say one thing about what Barbara said. I absolutely agree with what she said for many reasons. One, Israelis are very good at what they do. And two, Iranian intelligence has long been penetrated by the Israelis. If they make such a decision, I'm sure Israelis would find out. There are many reasons for the Iranian intelligence to be penetrated. It's money, ideology, for many reasons. The Iranian intelligence has been penetrated. And what the Iranian response would be, I think assassinations won't do it. Well, not only I can condone it, but I would point out that the Iranian thinking is they just want to make it look extremely loud and big. That's why they attacked the Al-Assad base after the assassination of General Soleimani the way they did. All those missiles, a lot of shooting, so forth, so on and so forth, and same with the assassination and the last attack that they did with the Israelis. 300 something missiles. I think that was a calculated attack. And despite what a lot of people might say it was an absolute failure, I don't see it as an absolute failure. They can learn, they can tweak their tactics, they can tweak their strategy. Next time, if they decide to attack, I think it will be more effective.
Yeah.
But again, Iranian thinking or modus operandi is they want to make sure that it's loud and everybody sees it. A lot of barking, a lot of media attention, maximum political message. But when it comes to its destruction, they make sure that there is room to scale down, and it does not necessarily escalate to another level.
So I completely agree with you. I think that has been a deliberate Iranian strategy. The Iranians primarily like to fight an asymmetric indirect war. While, as Barbara said, and I agree with that assessment, they're not very good at assassinating people as Mossad and Shin Bet and others do. But they have honed another skill, which is recruiting and training and controlling proxies over wide geographies. And I think that is a skill that they have really honed. But these covert assassination operations, they can always learn. They were not really into cyber, but after the Stuxnet episode, they got down to it, and today they have formidable cyber capabilities. So they're good at learning. But the U.S. base attack was also choreographed. This April attack, as we discussed, you and I, on this very program then, it was choreographed. The Americans knew the band in which they were going to attack. The Iranians just wanted to see how a world-class air defense umbrella is going to work against their missiles. And as you rightly point out, that they've also learned from the ground air defenses, the capabilities and the rest of it. And 6 or 7 ballistic missiles did penetrate that shield. And if they did not have tactical warheads, they could have. That is basically enough for Israel. So I think there were lessons learned on both sides. Now, I hate to do this because I hate other people doing this to me, but I will do this nonetheless and get you to tell me where you're going to wager what you're going to wager your money on 2 things: deal or no deal, Iran getting an off-ramp, not getting an off-ramp.
Is this for me or Barbara?
For both of you.
Barbara, you want to go first?
I'm going to say.
Now you know why I hate this, because when someone
deal and off ramp,
I really don't know how to respond to it.
Deal and off ramp. I won't give an exact timing for that, but deal and off ramp. We're coming on a year. Mm-hmm. There are Israelis who want to move back to their homes. Mm-hmm. We have college campuses, and Sina and I both teach, so we know We have college campuses coming back in a couple of weeks in the US where there will be more protest demonstrations and unrest. If this isn't settled. We have the Democratic Party convention next week.
Mm-hmm. So you optimistic for a deal and an off-ramp?
I will say there will be a deal and an off-ramp within the next month or so.
Okay. Sina?
I will say using the deal as an off-ramp. And let me add one more thing on assassinations. You brought it up. It's actually interesting that, Barbara might know and you might know that assassination is really a Persian word, like the Hashashin, like the Persians invented political assassination. They lost it to the Israelis.
No, absolutely. I mean, yes, you did. The Hashishan. So assassin comes from there, which is why I refer to it as the scalpel, or the stiletto, as the Italian Sicari used to rely on a very silent dagger that would create a lot of hemorrhage inside, but not let out a lot of blood. But thank you so much. I'm really grateful to both of you, Barbara Slavin, Sina Azodi, for your insights. And let's hope that there is a deal, and because of a deal, there is an off-ramp.
Inshallah, yes.
Inshallah is a good word to cap this program. That's it from this episode. If you like the discussion, give the program a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. And believe me, it doesn't get me any lucre, but it would certainly make me very happy. Until our next episode, goodbye and stay safe.